I'm going to start out today by doing a birdhouse ornament, and this is kind of what we're going for. There are a couple of these over in the instant gallery that are already colored and ready to go. This is just the turn portion of it. It's actually two pieces that are mortise and tenon together. And I'm going to pass this around. And if you want to, you can take it apart. I start out with a billet, about 2 by 2 by 6. And if you're going to do more than one of these things, which you'll find out that after your relatives see them, they'll want more than one. It's a good idea to make yourself a little plan, so you remember, where your cuts are and how big a piece you need and so forth. So. I started out in furniture building a number of years ago, so I got into making storyboards and patterns for the stuff that I do. And this is just a piece of plywood that I mapped out the pattern for. I'm going to start that over here if you want to pass it around, look at it. The billet, all I did with it is I did pre-drill for, the hole in the birdhouse, and also for a perch. It's turned between centers, and I took the liberty of going ahead and turning this around because I didn't think you guys would want to stand here and watch me turn this down. So I'm going to chuck it up, and I also pre-drilled with a 1-inch Forstner bit about 1.5 inches deep into it, or 1.25 inches deep. Just to clear out some of the material inside and keep the weight down on it a little bit. Yeah, it looks like we're running pretty true. I'm going to start out with a spindle gouge and just take down what'll be the top of the birdhouse so that I can start to create my tenon to go into the top. This is an 1.1 inch Forstner bit. I drilled the hole into the body of the house to 1 inch. I need to have a little bit of a shoulder around it, so I'm going to go to about 1 1/8 inches. And the tenon only needs to be, like maybe 1/8 of an inch. It's not really critical. And now I'm going to begin to shape, what will become the bottom portion of the birdhouse. Okay. I want to take out some material from the inside. It's not really critical that you do a lot of hollowing on this, but it's nice to hollow it some just to lighten the weight of the thing a little bit. I'm using hard maple here. Material is it really doesn't make any difference what kind of material you're using. I've often thought that it might not be a bad idea just to make these out of a tree branch, but I am using kiln-dried hardwood for these. See if I left myself enough room here without taking the tailstock away. No, it's okay. Don't forget to tighten your chuck. And all I'm using here is just a negative rake scraper, a little homemade job that comes in pretty handy for taking out small amounts of material inside. I'm going to check the wall thickness. This is a little bit thick. I'm going to leave it thick just for time. Normally I'd take them down to 1/8 of an inch or less. It does take a little time to scoop them out. We'll go back to the spindle gouge here. do a little scraping action here to clean up what the turner down south named Mark Soleil that I've watched a number of his videos and have had some conversations with on the phone. And Soleil does this little routine where he does the scraping thing. He calls it taking out your nervous marks. I didn't realize I was that nervous, but I guess I am. And don't anybody make fun of my tool rest. This is I think it's a 3-inch from a guy named Steve Sinner down in Davenport, Iowa, at Advanced Lathe Tools. And his tool rests are actually pretty nice. One of the nicest things about them is he can make them any length you want them. And they have hardened steel rod on, like Robust has. And I found that they're actually a pretty good investment. Forming a little, most people would call this a finial. Found out it's not really a finial. The finial is what goes on top of the ornament. The drop down below is actually called an icicle. And so we're working on a real short icicle here. Okay, now ordinarily this is the point where I would get the sandpaper out and clean this up. And when I was working on one of these the other night at home, I had the end of the icicle down to a pretty fine point here. That's where I learned that you don't press real hard with the sandpaper. Yeah, it not only did that, but I also had the dust collector running, and these things are noisy when they get involved in that cyclone. So you want to be careful about that. I'm going to do a little bit of work on what will become the top here before I take the birdhouse itself off. All I'm going to do is taper this end some. I want the lid or the roof, I guess, of the birdhouse to overhang the bottom a little bit. So I'm tapering this end just a small amount. And now we can go ahead and take her off. And somebody might ask, why aren't you using a parting tool to do this? Well, if I use a parting tool on this, there's a pretty good chance that I'll tear it out. And you rip out the grain. It's not so critical on the roof, but on the bottom of the icicle, I don't want to lose any more of this than I have to. The one that I passed around, by the way, is the one that went through the dust collector. and you'll see that it's Icicle is actually quite a bit shorter than this one. I'm going to hang on to this for a minute because I'm going to need it here shortly, and then I'll pass it around. By the way, this tool that I'm using is a beating and parting tool, and I use it to take off fairly substantial amounts of wood on spindles fairly quickly. It's kind of a brute force tool. I'm going to go in just a little more than 1/8 of an inch here. Okay, it's a little bit loose. The reason I like to fit this is that I also use the lid for a jam chuck to finish up the end on this. So if I decide to finish this one, I'll sand it, stuff a couple of pieces of tissue paper in here, and should be able to get a tighter fit on it. It's a little bit loose. There's what we just turned. I do just a little bit of hollowing on the lid or on the roof. It's not going to take it's not going to take that much weight out, but anything that you can do to reduce the weight on these, I think, is a good idea. So I'm just going to hollow out a little bit here. The other thing that you have to be careful of on hollowing on the inside is to make sure you don't take out so much material inside that you can go through when you're creating the profile on the outside. I'm just taking off the material to get a rough shape here, and then I'll refine it with the spindle gouge here in a minute. On this one, it's about 35 degrees on each side. It's about a 70-degree combined. Got some rough grain in here. I don't know if you could hear it or not, but that wasn't rough grain, that was a catch. Okay, well, I got rid of most of the nervous marks there. You know, that one more cut thing is one that'll kill you. Saw a guy walking around last weekend with a T-shirt on, said one more cut, and then a broken piece of wood. So sometimes it's tempting, but there's our roof. At home, I will take this, sand it, drill it, and then install a little perch and dye it. I put two of the ones that I did this fall that are dyed, finished, and ready to go over in the instant gallery. And the pedestals, I don't put a lot of work into them. What they are is really they're a slice of my maple tree that came down a couple of years ago with a piece of brass brazing rod, a bare brazing rod in them.
Where do you get the dye from?
I made some bells this year.
Yeah, brush or wipe on. Yeah.
And I'll pass these around. And basically, this is what I made for. I got I got 3 daughters and my wife, my mom, and stuff. So this kind of decoration goes over pretty well. So I'll walk through the process that I do, and you can actually pass a couple of these around. So I'm assuming we can all get our wood in the chucks and round it out. So I did that ahead of time so you don't have to watch me round out the stock. But I'll pass this around as well. So what I like to do when I'm doing repetitive turnings is I'll make a little template or a story stick. And I made 2 different ones because those bells, there's 2 different sizes. And let's see here. Where do you want this? That's pretty good, huh? Oops, I got them upside down. So basically, it's just the half a bell, and I measured. I made one first, right? So I play around a little bit, get the shape that I want, and the dimensions that look appealing, and then I create a template. So the measurements on here that I like to deal with is the overall diameter. I'll measure the depth of the hole so that when I drill it, I obviously don't go too far. And then I always like to pick a point. In this case, it was 1 inch. 1 inch from the bottom of the bell, I measure the diameter. So that gives me my target when I go to make that the smooth cut for the flare. And that's pretty much it. So it's a simple little. You can pass those around. It's a simple little ornament, kind of fun to turn. Once you get rolling, you can knock them out fairly quickly. And I probably won't spend a lot of time sanding today either, because that can be like watching paint dry. But do I what, Sap? I opted, and you'll see when they go around, I opted to hang the little jingle bells inside. And so I found some bells at Hobby Lobby that were colored green and reds. And so they're Christmas colors, and I just put those inside with the red ribbon that I found. And it actually turned out pretty good. You get a little bit of a noise, and yet, like parents with little kids are glad that it's not a lot of noise. When I knock these out, let's see here. I'll take my blocks of wood, and you put a little bit of waste, you space it out so you have a little bit of waste. And I just ran mine through the bandsaw quick, so I had a little shoulder and clamped it in my 4-jaw chuck. So if you can see that, I don't bother putting it on the lathe, spinning it, taking it off, reversing it, kind of a thing. So I can do both ends. Once I have my block squared off, I'll have it twice as long as it needs to be. And then I put a little block against my bandsaw so that I only go in like 1/4 of an inch. And then I rotate it 4 times quick. And then I move it over just a little bit more in my block so that it can go a little deeper. And then I'll do four more cuts, and then that's ready to stick in the chuck. I cut it in half, and I have 2 pieces. So, you know, that's kind of the way that started. So allows you to prep that stock and keep rolling. So this one I obviously rounded out already. And then would you prefer not to have the light on? Okay. And I got a chunk of wood in here that's either going to look really pretty or it's going to fall apart on me when I turn it. So we don't know that yet. Because I have it rounded out, the next step that I'll go through is I'll bore the hole. And I have a Forstner bit. What is that, about 3/4. And I'll run this one about 1 5/8 inches deep. Oh, awesome. I gotta grab my face shield here. All right. So I lucked out pretty good. This one is running really true. Even though I rounded it out at home. So the first step will be to drill my 1 5/8 inches. So what I do is I put it on 0 right on my tailstock here, and then I'll run it up and touch it. I like to turn it about 500. And then just for the record, yesterday when I was doing my trial, I reversed it so that I could sand it, and then I tried to drill a hole in reverse, and it takes like a lot longer. All right, and my bit turned color. The wood cherry turns a different color, so if you like that dark stuff, you know, give it a shot. But I don't recommend it. There's better ways to color your wood. What really depressed me is I couldn't figure out why it wasn't cutting, so I went faster. Yeah, chain on the chainsaw. Yep, go figure. So we all do that. We all say, oops. So then once I knock the hole in, I'll put the, what did I do with that already, right? Did I put it in the box? You're right, I did. Thank you. Yeah, stay tuned. I'm going to need you again in a little bit. I like to shape it with support on both ends. It's just better when you're hogging off more material. So. And since the story stick is being passed around, I'm just gonna go by memory here. I like to get a general shape, so I passed around kind of the squared off stock. It gets it close. You get a better feel for how much you're going to want to hollow it, because we do have that form. Then before I take it off, I'll get it really close to the final shape, except I leave that attachment point about an inch thick maybe, and that has been plenty strong for me to hollow out the inside. And then when I'm done hollowing, then I'll just finish the top curve, and you can see all my little bells just have that little topper on there, that little kind of a finial on top, and that's when I'll either cut it off with a saw or I part it off with the parting tool. So I got it kind of roughed in. I'll measure my 1 inch up. Somebody have the small little story stick? What is the measurement on 1 inch? I already forgot. 1 inch from the bottom. It's 1 7/8. Thank you. Oh, that would be that's the full dimension, I think.
Inch and a quarter. You're talking about right here?
Yeah. Yep. 1 1/4 inches.
Look at it again. Yeah, the base is
And again, you don't have to do this. You can freehand all of them. But my goal was, like, see the 4 little ones here? I'm going to try to hang them all together as kind of a grouping. And then it just looks a little better if they all have the same general shape, because if I do them freehand, they won't look alike, you know? Yep. Exactly. Exactly. All right. So that's my big calibration measurement. And then from here I can usually keep them pretty consistent. What's that? Oh, thank you. And sometimes I forget it's down when I do other things. You know, like wipe my nose. And then the rim is kind of the spot where you can have your artistic interpretation. And the batch that I've been making, I kind of put that extra bead down around the bottom. And so I've been carving in a little bit. And then I roll this back because you don't want that bead to be out further than the end of the bell. Yeah, it doesn't feel too bad. See how the grain looks. Well, I turned away all the pretty grain. Who's done that before, right? That block of wood on the corners is really pretty, and then we all know where the corners end up. Yeah, on the floor. All right, so I'll touch this up just a little bit, and then I'll hollow the inside. Actually, I'm going to get a smaller tip on. Well, this one slides really good. Kelly must have cleaned it up last week after I was done using it. Slides better than mine. Kind of wish I had a smaller tool like this because yeah, I guess I'll take it off. This one's just a little bit big, but I made do. And it works pretty good, but I made the mistake of going with the big one because I was making larger vessels at the time, and now I'm not. So now with the hole, it's basically just keep carving it out on the inside until you get the thickness that you want. And the really nice part is that this is so shallow that it's real easy to gauge the thickness. And then once I get it close, I hog off most of the material, I'm switching to a scraper. And this is just, just a small scraper. It's one of my favorite ones for being small. You know, it's still got a little bit of thickness to there. It doesn't vibrate and chatter as long as you don't go too deep. And then you ought to make sure you're setting the depth correct with all of these scraping tools because you do not want to catch. So you're going at the center mark or a little bit higher. And you can also, if you don't use scrapers a lot inside, you can also tip your tool So you get kind of a negative rake, and then that'll help minimize the catches. So if I go straight in, on this one I'm trying to stay on that horizontal axis, and then like I said, if I wanted to finesse it a little bit, I'll tip it up this way so that I have a little more negative rake to it. But you can see if your tool is sharp, you'll actually get some nice shavings instead of sawdust. And that's a key for, you know, having the scrapers work well. If it chatters, then I like to make sure that, can you hear that when I hit it? Yeah, like that. So you're getting more vibration than you want. So you either put your hand on the outside, help reduce that, or you could tip the angle on your tool. And if you can finish up with a couple of really light strokes, that'll help reduce your sanding effort inside as well. So if you want to get a feel for how the thickness is, you know, the wire trick works pretty good. So this is set at, I don't know, maybe 1/8 of an inch. And you can see that I have it, most of it's thinner than 1/8 of an inch, until it gets up to the top. At this point, you have to figure out if you're going to make, you know, the little, the table bell, or I don't know what else to call it. If I'm making one of these, then before I part it off, I leave a small dowel on the tip. And I should have left this unglued, but basically there's a hole. Let me see. There's a hole drilled in the handle, and I have the tenon is on the bell. Yeah. And so then it's kind of the same process. I'll round off, and how are we doing for, we're actually doing pretty good for time. So I'll round off the handle, and then because I have a small dimple in the end, you can usually get a hole in there without any problems, even though that it's sitting way out here kind of unsupported. As long as you're approaching it slowly, that the bit will grab, and I haven't had any problems. And then the biggest challenge is making sure that the size of the dowel fits your hole, because we all know how that goes when, you know, it cut it 3 times and it's still too narrow. Yeah. So I'll call the inside on this one complete. And again, I'm not going to spend time sanding. You know, make sure you got plenty of room for the tools. So I like to get rid of some of this waste. Yeah, I'm running out of tool rest here. And then try to take real nice light, and then the key is controlled. Sometimes I just don't have good control. That's not too bad. Grabbing a little finer tip tool so I could get in here and make that cut. And if you make these cuts clean enough, then you don't have to sand the tops, because these are always the hard little ones to sand on. So if you can get a nice clean little finishing cut on there, then you go right to your varnish or stain or whatever you're going to put on there. And whoops. I was going to say instead of parting it off, but I think I'll part it off right now. Instead of parting it off, I was going to leave the dowel, and pretty much saved it. What I would do at this point is take my drill, and I would pop a hole through if I'm going to do the hanging one, like that. And I did have to play around with this ribbon. What I found out was the knots are enough to keep this from sliding through. But the ribbon doesn't hold the knot. You know what I mean? So you tie it, and then you walk away and you come back and it slips. So I took a hot glue gun. Well, the knot was still kind of loose and big. And I would put a drip of hot glue right in the knot, and then I would cinch the knot and hold it for a second, and that worked out really good. So then the knot won't move, won't come untied, and I did the same on the top. And then I'm sorry, showing everybody, but if you look at these closely, and feel free to tug on them and pull them through, you'll see there's a couple of little hairs from the hot glue gun, and again, that was all part of the plan, to make sure that you can hang these on a tree or go wherever you want, and a couple of years from now they'll still be intact. So, and I didn't sand this one, but I got a pretty decent cut on it for that. Like I said, I was gonna take one more cut, and then I was gonna leave a dowel on there, but I changed my mind at the last minute. Yeah, it would go right in that dust collector and keep going. Hey, actually, it was funny. I was cleaning the shop, which I don't do it nearly enough, and I ran into all these old bowls. I'm thinking we should do that. Everybody should bring in all of the old bowls that they got sitting around. Let's throw them in a big box and see if we can come up with some kind of an idea. Because I was thinking if I took all these bowls and I would put them on the bandsaw and slice like a half an inch off of every one, I'd probably have 200 rings, right? And then what can you do with 200 rings of wood? There's got to be a sculpture or something in there somewhere. But I think that would be kind of funny because, we've all got them. And you got either a chunk of wood that for some reason it didn't turn out as well, or you warped a couple of bowls and you just don't feel like going back to it. But yeah, I got quite a collection, and I'm trying to think, what can I do with them, because I got to clear the place. Jack. Oh yeah, like those bear claw kind of things, right? Oh yeah. That's that's a good idea. That's a good idea. So I'll pass this around, and do you want me to do a handle, or are we good? Is the handles? I brought one just in case. All right. Oh, you know what though? I forgot my drill. So we're gonna pretend I drilled a hole in the end, because that was where I went wrong on the last piece anyway. So I'm probably better off not drilling this hole. But what I did here is I rounded off this stock to save some time again for the demo. And I'm trying to make all my handles the same. And I think, did I just pass one of these around? There was 3 of these floating around. Maybe it's on the table yet. But again, this was a pattern that I found. I changed it a little bit, for my purposes, and I liked it. So I'm like, well, why don't I try to make them all the same? Again, because I'm giving them to my daughters, and then they'll look at them and they'll say, oh, looks good, and they all got the same thing, so they don't have to figure out, who the favorite daughter is. So I created a story stick for this one as well, and it matches up with the handle. What I like millimeters. I'm finding myself using them more and more. So, isn't it? Yeah, and you count the millimeters, and so this was all in millimeters, and so I got 13 millimeters to to this, or it's 8 millimeters wide, 15 millimeters from the end, and I keep spacing them out that way, and then I can. It's right in between 17 and 19 millimeters. and it again, this works out pretty good. But who was our demonstrator who's been here a couple of times? Yeah, Murner. And I'm listening to him and I'm going like, yeah, maybe the Woodturners can be the catalyst for turning all of the U.S. into metric. Maybe that could be one of our goals. Now, if I was in production, I'd have, I have on my reference points here, probably got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 different points that I'm going to want to calibrate or cut down to. And I would have a caliper for each one of those, right? Or you could cut a piece of wood in the shape of a C. You could do different things to make sure that you're matching that up. That'll help, but let's see here. Yeah. I like colors. Although to get sidetracked, one of my good friends at work, when I worked with him, was colorblind, and I'd always look at him, and he'd say, what are you looking at? And I'm going, did you dress yourself again today? And then he'd look at me, and then he figured it out after about 3 or 4 of those. I was just being rude. But. Yeah. Yeah, and we accused him of having granimals for adults. You got to match the raccoons. Your pants, your raccoon pants, and your raccoon shirt have to be brought together. All right. So here's my stick, and I'll orient it, the way I want. What I like to do, where I have that valley, and the valley is concave, it's not a sharp point. Then I'm making them thicker because I got. The heck would that be? That's weird. It's not tight enough, huh? And then I'll touch. I marked the other ones where the spots are, or the high spots are. And then like this one, even though there's a high point, you know, in theory, this one could actually be kind of a blended high spot because there's not a sharp point on it. And let's see here. I guess I'll just use this one. And then, oh sure, then I didn't bring my millimeter scale. I brought my, hey, I'm okay. What's that? Yeah, who can do quick conversions? Oh, thanks, Kelly. So I got a couple of 15s and a 16. And so 15s will be the 2 points up front. All right, where did I put it? My parting tool. There it is. In my toolbox. See, you were yeah. Thank you. Does it sound bad with the face shield down, or is it okay? It's okay, huh? All right, so that was the two 15s. I'll go to a 16. Oh, look at that. I'm right there already. Lucky me. And then 11. And actually from here, I can eyeball it. I think this one's I'll do the 13 on the end too. Okay, so I enjoy having the actual piece in front of me more so than my pattern if I had it. What I'll do first is I'll kind of do the easy stuff here. So I'm gonna cut the cove out between the 2 points. And then I have another cove from this point right here. It kind of gets to a fuzzy, thick spot on the top of the handle, so I'll actually cut it a little bit short right now and fade that in or blend it in later. I've used my tool enough where I actually need one more sharpening on this one. Doesn't quite want to grab. And to make it more challenging, I'm doing it left-handed, which is not real easy for me. Oh yeah, I forgot my other measurement there. That was 11 on the end. My parting tool is getting a little dull too. Close enough. Now if you get it into this point and it's actually vibrating, you can hear it making a little bit of squeaking noise. You can just wrap your finger around it real lightly. A lot of times that'll help give you a nice smooth cut, and it'll reduce the noise and the vibration that you're getting. There. All right, so now in front here I had a round, half a round bead and a full bead. Full bead was on the end. I got one more smaller gouge for that last. Oops, now I got a line there. That's not gonna be. If I make the same mistake twice today, then you guys will think it's not a mistake, right? didn't bring a straight scraper. Pretend that's sandpaper. And I would have, the only difference is I would have drilled the hole before I did the shape. So I would have dropped, 1/4-inch hole in here first, and then I'd be set.
So I always say about wood turning, to me, it's problem solving. And people, when we start with classes, I say the most common thing you can do, you go from solving one problem to figuring out another. And could I have one of the short tool rests from on the shelves over there? Thank you. So I never prepare real well, so I have problems to solve as I go along. So what I'm going to do is the Christmas ornament with the hollow ball, hollow sphere, and feels like. Okay. So. We can live with that. Okay, so I'm just roughing out my sphere. I used to turn these a lot closer on the bandsaw, but I almost cut a finger off one time turning small cylinders. And actually it was for Christmas ornaments. So I've gone to roughing them out on the lathe rather than doing it to a perfect cylinder on the bandsaw. But just looking, I'm going to put a tenon on this side to drive it once I take it and turn it off. And all I'm looking at is grain pattern. I like this. It seems like it's coming down, so when that's hanging, I like the grain orientation. And that's all I'm looking at. With this is a chunk of box elder burl, and the grain's all over the place, so there is no right or wrong. It's all based on how I want it to look in the end. So I like that. So one of this is 1/4 inch bowl gouge tool. I recommend everybody to get. I use it on almost every bowl I turn, but a lot of ornaments. It's just a nice, let's see, where are we here? A nice tool to use, get you into tight places, and I prefer my bowl gouges to most other gouges, like the spindle gouge and stuff. Now my tenon, I've got along a set of pin jaws, so I can go with a smaller tenon. And that's what's going through my head right now, is what do I want to make? Now using Tim's Forstner bit, I'm going to be putting a 3/4 inch hole, once I chuck it up, straight through this piece. So I always think about, if you're putting a top on and your icicle coming off the bottom, a finial off the bottom, you want to take into account that 3/4 inch hole in the center of it. So it's one of those things that you think about ahead of time with when it comes time to make those pieces. You got to cover that hole. But you also want to leave yourself enough room to get in there and be able to hollow. So, like I say, 3/4 is about a minimum, I find. Smaller than that, it's just really difficult to get in there. Oh, is that going that way okay? But I also find that instead of a round ball, an elliptical one is easier to put your pieces on top and bottom with. A little bit there. What we're doing on time. So I'm leaving my tenon, myself a spot, my tenon a little thick, so I got a place to part it off in the end. Got it a little too flat on the bottom there. That looks pretty good. Okay, I think the tenon looks pretty good. Flatten this little piece out. So I've got a set, I got to clean up that inside corner a little bit. I've got a set of pin jaws on my other chuck. So, really rough. It must be that I'm coming back on the grain. So hopefully when I turn it around, I'll be able to get rid of a lot of that. I'm hoping that goes. I guess not. I thought it was going to go through, but where is the... Yeah, that's got to be right there. Okay. Doesn't have to be pretty on the backside. It's going to get turned off, so. Yeah, I could see my gouge coming through on the other side. So now, I'm going to try to pick up, if you can see it, there's a little tear out on the grain, so I'm going to have to try to cut backwards on it from what I was doing. It does. It makes a little difference. You can see it almost has a burnished look. This side's going to be a little tougher to reach in and pull out. Oof, got my knuckles. Yeah, I'm not sure that that's an improvement over the tear out, to be honest, so I'll give it a little more of a shear scrape. But I'll tell you what, I'm struggling with this little tool rest. It's smaller. I've got some at home that I made myself. It's got a much bigger platform for your hands. And that is one of the things that I just do until I get a cut or a shape right. I'll go back and forth and back and forth. And I always say it's one of the reasons I'm not a good production turner, because I'm always looking for that perfect surface. Okay, good enough for the demonstration. Made a little difference, not much. So, I'm a big believer in carbide cutting tools. And versus scrapers, the difference is that the cutting tools, I think you're a better overhead, Cleet. The cutting tools have a little dish, and you're actually using a bit of the bevel on the outside. There. But they do it. To me, they're just efficient. The key to using these is, where did we go? Keeping it tipped over. So if this is flat, you know, the top surface of it is pointed up at the ceiling horizontally, tip it over 45 degrees, and generally they're almost catch free. Almost. Cleet, could you see if there's some masking tape over on the shelf that... One of my favorite kind of old demonstrators to watch was Stewart Mortimer, and he always did vessels that had the slots in them and open kind of, but he hollowed, and he rarely used air to empty out his vessel as he turned. He would just pull the shavings out, and I was always amazed that he could do that. And I just saw that there was a thing in the journal that he is now retired from doing demonstrations anymore. But he was an old Irishman, I think a police captain or something. But he was a lot of fun to watch. He always had, you know, a bunch of good stories to listen to as he was turning. But like I say, this whole thing about as you're hollowing, you go in and pull back and just clean your shavings out. So I just put the tape on, put my tool up over the top, and kind of lined up so I'm a little short of the other side. And it's a reference point as you're turning. I put the handle of my tool under my forearm, so if I do get a catch, pretty strong. So, and like I say, all I was doing was lining up the tape with the front edge of my sphere and making sure I'm a little short of the backside. Come in, take a look over here. Where am I going to be? I don't want to be past the outside. Otherwise, potentially you're going to go through. And I'll try to do that. But so one of the tools that I've really found for doing this that has been a great help to really speed up the process is seem to be missing one of them, still in my bag somewhere. There's a set of 3 hunter hollowing tools with the carbide cutters, and they're small, but they're designed for doing these ornaments. And I really like them. To me, it speeds up the process. They aren't foolproof, but it really does seem to speed things up. In that the hook, the length of the hook, if you're looking at it like this, once you get this crook in and it's up against your opening, it's a depth gauge, basically. So you make your spheres about the same size each time you bring this up, and you're not going to be through the outside. So, in theory. Kelton hollowing tools in the 5/16. Very simple scrapers. So these are tools that you can, the Keltons, I've had for years, and there's a little flat piece of higher grade steel laminated onto the mild steel that's the bar. They all work very well. I just like the Keltons, or the my hunter tools, I like the way they cut versus the scrapers. But inside the ornament, no one's ever going to see it, so does it matter? There's definitely a difference in the price of the tools. I think the hunters, the set run almost $200, and the Keltons, I want to say, are around $125, I believe. So now what I need to do is go in. I'm working on the back side now. In here, this side's pretty well done up to the center point. So now I've got to get in and do that thin down the back side. I remember, who was it? Dick Singh did a demonstration for us once, and he was doing ornaments. And he said, yep, down to 1/8 inch wall thickness, and he passed it around. The thickest 1/8 inch I've ever seen. But no one said a word. Okay, so make sure. So, just trying to go in and feel literally that kind of where you left off inside. That's a little grabby. This is one of those things I look at. I set my tool up all the time with the cutter, so the set screws are lined up with the cutter being horizontal. So when I get in there, I know it's grabbing. I look down, my set screws were almost straight up, so I was using it horizontal, and it was grabbing. So I try to get it turned over to take away some of that grab. Good. How are we doing on time? You don't. There's always. So overall, not too bad. I'll take and part it off. If I were at home, I'd get really fussy about this. Inside, I can feel a ridge at the center point here, and I don't like that. I'm not going to get into it because I really can spend a lot of time on trying to finesse out little things like that, and it's already 5 to 12. So. If you want, I can just finish with this, or I can do a top and a little finial on for this. Up to you guys, how much you want to stay for. And where did should I end it at the sphere? What do you think? Enough? I'm going to have to put it in back up to seat to get her to run through. Okay. Okay. So you got to remember when you're parting off like this that there is a 3/4 inch hole through the center of it. Cleet, can you catch this? Ooh, that's hot. You can pass it around. So it came with, yeah, it's got a fairly uniform thickness. It's like I say, the only spot that I feel is out on the outside edge.